Great. Well, thank you so much, Kathy. J'aimerais remercier le AMO et Kathy Malloy pour l'invitation de vous présenter mes réflexions sur les exhibitions d'art public que je développe durant une vingtaine d'années. So I want to talk a little bit about the art exhibitions that I've been developing over a period of 20 years now, and then talk about Landslide and what I think we accomplished with Landslide. Landslide closed only a couple of weeks ago, so I'm still a bit hungover from that experience. It was a whirlwind 3-week public art exhibition. So I'm not, things are still settling down and sinking in. Since the late 80s, I have been involved with the Public Access Collective. This is a curatorial collective made up of artists and educators. And in the late 80s, we decided that Toronto was becoming a world-class city and that public spaces were disappearing. And so we really wanted to experiment with the ways in which art was taking place in public and innovate the shape of public art. So some of our first exhibitions involved, actually, go backwards here. The first one in 1987 was an electronic billboard project on Yonge Street that no longer exists, but we invited 25 artists to inhabit this electronic billboard sign that was essentially designed for weather information and advertising. A year later, we approached an advertising company that was running a 36-monitor video wall at Square One in Mississauga, and we invited, again, another group of about 25 artists to develop projects on this electronic billboard sign. This is a really horrible photograph, but it was a piece by John Grayson called The Ads Epidemic. So this was all very exciting, and these kinds of projects were going on in New York City and London. And we involved lots of art stars in our projects, and we were very, very proud of ourselves. The only problem is that really we neglected one essential factor, and that was to basically figure out who we were talking to. We were talking to each other, and as I said, we thought we were great. But at Square One, for example, when we began to ask shoppers what they thought of the art project, they were like, "What art project? What? There's no art project. There's advertising." So essentially, we were not noticed. So over the next 10 years, we continued on our trek to inhabit public spaces in train stations and in corporate elevators and in public washrooms. But I would suggest that we continue to talk to ourselves and to the art community, but not to the public at large or to really engage in any significant way in a dialogue with people, with audiences. So, in 2000, there was a shift in the way in which we were thinking about public art. And we received a Canada Millennium Grant, Canada Council Millennium Grant. Then those were geared towards developing new audiences for public art. And we staged an exhibition called Being on Time that was at Central Technical High School. And we invited 18 artists to work with students from the high school and to really start to develop what I call dialogic projects with the students and with the community. So Kelly Mark, who is a very well-known artist in Canada, staged a performance where she did a series of choreographies and movements outside of the school for 2 weeks, every day at the same time without talking to one student. Now, eventually, a crowd began to gather as students figured out that, wow, this is an artwork. Something weird is going on. And Central Tech was a great school to collaborate with because they have a fantastic, one of the oldest art programs in Canada. John Grayson really dug up some of the homophobic slurs that were, scattered throughout the school and worked with students there, and on and on. Michael Snow did it. I do have to mention this project because I thought it was just a terrific project in the Teachers Lounge, where students were invited to take a ticket. They were, first of all, invited to the Teachers Lounge, which was unusual, but they were invited to take a ticket and wait for their number to be called on a little LCD monitor. But sadly, some numbers were never called, and for Michael Snow, this was a lesson in life, but also got them really to think about time and history and the structure of inequality that the students live in. So I want to kind of shift over to another project that we were involved in several years later called the Leona Drive Project. So over, from about 2000 to the present, I became involved in researching cities. And in particular, suburbs and edge cities, because if you're going to study cities, you don't go downtown, you go right to the edge where you can really see development going on. And I'm very concerned, as I know we all are, in ecological issues. And so in studying cities, part of the impetus is actually to think about how we are going to live together on this planet. So I was working with a group of brilliant graduate students at York University who were also all practicing artists. And together we devised this project called the Leona Drive Project. Leona Drive was a small street in Willowdale, Ontario. And what we noticed in studying that area, we would go for walks, is that we would turn the corner and there would be rows and rows of houses boarded up. And these houses had been essentially bought by developers, and in this case, this was a row of 6 houses that had been vacant for 7 years. A developer had a zoning application in to essentially demolish those houses. So remember 2009, huge economic crisis. Developers had no idea what they were going to do with their properties. And so this particular row of houses wasn't going anywhere. We approached the municipal councillor, and he connected us with the developer who owned these houses. And we were also trying to find a way to work with the Claude Watson School for the Arts, or the high school in the area, which would also connect us to families in the area. And so the developer kind of went for the idea, even though he had no idea what he was getting into. So we staged a public art exhibition in these houses. We were also collaborating, I have to mention, with my colleague at OCAD University, Michael Prokopow, who is a historian. And history was really central to what we wanted to do with this project. These houses disappear so quickly, and what we wanted to say was what's lost when these things disappear. And the public and the neighborhoods have no say over, what is going to go up. And of course, $1 million monster houses were going to replace these little bungalows. But who cares about these bungalows? So we began to dig up this, what the architectural historian Siegfried Gideon is called anonymous history. It's a history that people don't really know about, the history of patents, the history of development in a city, the history of the development of these CMHC houses, little bungalows. There's nothing beautiful about them. Nobody cherishes them, but they provided, veterans with a place to live. We were also interested in the lives lived in those houses, and many of the artists. Well, I gave those are the monster houses that replaced them. Many of the artists went and did research on the people that lived in the houses. We worked mostly in the outside on the physical surfaces of the houses. This is a project by the architect Antelieu, who decided to paint one of the houses green because he discovered they looked a lot like Monopoly pieces. Other artists went inside the houses and found objects in the houses. One of the houses in particular belonged to Ruth Gillespie, who had lived there for many years. And so some of the installations used her things. A psychic medium was brought in order to really gain a more profound access to the sensibilities of those houses. What excited me about this project was that it was intergenerational, so it appealed to kids and it appealed to an elderly generation, an older generation that actually lived in the area but had raised their children in the area. It also attracted the cool hipsters from the downtown core who never go beyond St. Clair. I don't even think St. Clair is right, DuPont. And people from other parts of Ontario. It was a project that belonged to the neighborhood, and I love this particular picture because people would come regularly and photograph themselves in front of it. Neighborhood residents would give tours. Of the exhibition. So we no longer had control over this thing. It was a museum of sorts, a vernacular museum, and it was something that people were very invested in, and stories were absolutely central to the way that this exhibition unfolded. And that's my punchline, is that it was replaced by monster houses. But what I think we accomplished was a pause. It was only 2 weeks. That exhibition was very, very brief, but it was a pause in the processes of development that generally take place without anybody knowing what's going on. So the only thing that disappointed me, or that I wanted to continue to explore, was the sense of future. Yes, we dealt with the past, and it was wonderful to dig up the lives lived in those houses, the stories that were lost. But what about the future of development? What about the future of living together on this earth, living with the effects of climate change? How cities themselves are being designed has to change. So that's where Landslide came about. And I teach at York University, so I'm used to that area. Many of our students are from Markham, and so I was really interested in Markham, as Kathy was saying, as a 21st century city. It is the most diverse municipality in Canada. It's also connected to the Greenbelt, and it's also a place where the tensions between economic development and ecology and preservation are very present. And it's something that the city itself, just newly branded, 2012, has been dealing with a very strong greenprint plan and sustainability plan. Nevertheless, it's not something that's easily resolved, as you can imagine. So Markham is just a very, very interesting place to stage this kind of exhibition. Initially, and I don't know if I ever told you this, Kathy, my first inclination was to try to find a subdivision that was completely blank. I don't know if you've ever seen these subdivisions, but the houses aren't up yet, but the streets are paved and the lights are in, and there's something spooky and ghost town-like about them. So I did try to interest some developers in this kind of project, and I never got a call back. So I started to think about working with a museum, and the Markham Museum in particular, because it has a heritage village, and I was interested in heritage villages because historically these villages were designed very much in tandem with the development of suburbs. And they're echoes of each other. What these villages did was provide these suburbs that were taking place in the middle of nowhere, with the land completely erased, and kind of ahistoric, non-places, provide these suburbs with a sense of history and historical continuity. Now, Kathy has told me often, I don't know if I have this right, this is what she's explained to me. But the Markham Museum is not a heritage village. It makes no sense whatsoever. The buildings are all from different periods, so please stop referring to it as a heritage village. So I have really tried, but I love it. It is, to me, it is designed as a village, and as Robert Everett Green wrote in his review of the show, it smells of data. It's very surreal. You know, it is a strange place, and what a fantabulous place to palette, really, to stage this kind of site-specific exhibition. So I was very lucky. This is, you know, with exhibitions, there's always a bit of what I like to call huruguru. That I can't describe what that means, but it's just the energy that is the wind at your back. The project is, it's kind of, things are partying, the path is there. Anyways, so it had that. So when I contacted Kathy to propose this kind of crazy site-specific exhibition about the future, to engage with the past, I was sort of lying a bit, and I was like, now the artists will not necessarily go in the houses, and they won't disturb very much. They maybe will, be in the yard somewhere, and maybe a garden, or I don't. And actually, Janet Reed, the curator, was also at this meeting, and both of them were like, "We know who you are, we know what you've done, and we like it." And Kathy explained to me that the museum was in the process of redefining its mandate. And sustainability was a hugely important aspect of what she wanted to do with the museum. So I've said this many times, but that is just pure luck to actually encounter somebody who's willing to take the risk and allow 30 artists to come in to the museum and transform it. And that is what these artists did. So one of the first things to happen last summer was Glynis Logue, who's an environmental designer, got it in her head. Well, she wanted to do something, first of all. She was like, I need to be involved in this project. I think it's fantastic. And then she said, I'm going to plant a river of sunflowers, and it's going to be 700 meters long. That is long. That is crazy. And I was like, you know what, we don't have that much money, blah, blah, blah. And again, Kathy was, I did mention it to her, and she was like, okay, try it. So she did, and we were just lucky with the weather and everything, so that this idea of the river was very important. And it meandered throughout the whole exhibition and really tied things together in a very beautiful way. And it's also this sense of an ecology. There were 18 different species of sunflowers, so ecological diversity, very important. The idea of the line was a unifying metaphor that we used with the artists to help them to kind of ground their very, very diverse projects. I mean, really, this was a mosaic of different interpretations of the past, augmenting the past, but also projections into the future. But what we said is, think about the line. The line is something which divides, the city, the urban environment from the natural environment. The line that's used to parse land up and commodify it. The line that's used to demarcate the present from the past. So the line itself was a kind of fluid metaphor that the artists were working with. And the river itself as a kind of antithesis to the idea of the grid and to linear history. It's a river that has its own way of doing things. The other artists that, I'm just going to foreground a few of the projects, and you'll see one of them tonight at the Markham Museum, Mark David Wholesale's project, which is in the museum, which is called Homunculus, which is another line. It's a flock of beings, avatars. But this project that you're seeing right here was by an artist, Jenny Suddick, who grew up in Markham and who essentially approached me when she found out about the exhibition as it was developing. And she's a very well-known artist in Toronto, and she was like, this is my project. I want to use my bedroom as an installation in the museum, as a kind of anthropology of the teenage girl that grew up in Markham, because she moved out of her parents' house, her parents' suburban house, when she was 20 years old, but they never changed it. So in that bedroom, any of you that have raised teenage girls know there are layers, and the changes every 6 months. And so that's essentially what she had. So I was like, fantastic, bring this in. And so this was Jenny Suddick's contribution to us thinking about the past in an augmented way and the future. She also went on and interviewed old-timers, mostly old-timers who grew up in Markham, about the walks that they used to love to take in Markham or still love to take. And then she devised, through these postcards, a number of different walks that people could go on in Markham. Also, a lot of those walks are impossible because Markham has changed so much, so those beautiful landmarks have completely disappeared, being replaced with different kinds of architectures. The line continued with Adrian Blackwell, who's an architect, and Jane Hutton, who's an environmental landscape designer. And what they did is they essentially built this tent around, this was the saddle house. That's not the right word. What is it? It's the harness shop, see? So it was a harness shop, and they were interested in horses, of course, because they were thinking about the way in which the land was cleared historically, the history of the land. And horses are the original technology. And so the title of this is The Surface of Land That Was Moved in Order to Create This House. And what it referred to, and they looked at other houses that were on site at the Markham Museum, looking at the original locations and looking at the way in which the land itself has been leveled, because when development happens, that's one of the first things that happens, is that land is leveled, topsoil is lost, and it's something that can never, in fact, be replaced. So in their project, they really wanted to draw attention to that whole process of leveling. Another project by Frank Havermans, who is an artist from Holland, who chose the barn to work in and just fell in love with the whole pulley system in the barns, which he called a local intelligence. And inside the barn, he just expanded all of the different pulleys in order to hold up this sculpture that hung off of the barn. And the sculpture itself was based on a 1790 map of Markham. So Markham started as a very simple square. Markham is a very old community, older than Toronto. But then the sculpture itself kind of expands into this chaos, which in a sense is what sprawl is about. We had daytime and nighttime iterations of this project, and we did a massive projection on the Kinney barn, so another barn on the other side of the Markham Museum. The Markham Museum, by the way, is 25 acres. It's a big footprint. And this is by Patrizio de Villa and Dave Colangelo, and they essentially were also very much focused on the line, on fences, on the way in which land itself is developed. And, projected over the barn at night, it was absolutely beautiful and spectacular. And the exhibition culminated in a collaboration with a garden that had been growing all summer long with lots of fruits and vegetables, and there were seed exchanges going on. And two of the artists made soup, made corn soup, and we offered that soup for free, and it was just a beautiful coming together of all of these different elements that went into the exhibition. I have other slides. I just quickly want to mention a work by Xu Tan, who is an artist from China, who was very involved in working with the Chinese community, came several times, spent several months, and just asking the members of the Chinese community in Markham why they chose Markham, what they were looking for when they chose Markham. And all of them talked about nature. That's what attracted them. And of course, they were also saying that as Markham was developing, what was being lost was that sense of nature. Included in Schutan's installation was a little toy train that's on site at the Markham Museum and is run by 2 members of the Historic Society. And Schutan really wanted to include them in his installation and have that train running on weekends for kids. And so I really had to negotiate that because they were very distrustful. They said, well, why does this great Chinese artist want to include us from the Historic Society in our toy train? And Schutan's whole point was that that's what history is about. History is a collaboration, and that people are coming from elsewhere and they're bringing their history and they're bringing their memories and they're making new lives, but they also need to engage with people that have lived in Markham all of their lives. And this is what diasporic and collaborative history is about. So I thought it was a very beautiful collaboration. Ian Baxter Ann, one of Canada's great conceptual artists, proposed a maze that he produced out of grass, and it was a maze that was very much based on on words that refer to ecology, so words like conserve and preserve and recycle. And you could it was very not mystical, but reflexive in a way. So if you walk through the maze, it was mostly children that would just go crazy and walk through the maze as quickly as possible. But in general, it was something that allowed us to pause and think about the earth. So, History is Public Art exhibition. So it was site-specific. That's very important. It only lasted 3 weeks. There are reminiscences and pieces of it, but essentially it takes place as an event. It's not meant to last. When we were taking down Frank Havermans, this is the Dutch architect who did all of these pulleys and everything, when we were taking it down, I said to Frank, I feel terrible because he worked so hard on these beautiful pulleys that he created. And he said, no, it's meant to come in at one moment in time and then to disappear. So the whole shape of the exhibition, it's meant to have this force and to be very, very performative. And a lot of the projects, I mentioned the soup and the meal that kind of concluded the exhibition, but a lot of the projects were relational. So Schutan working with the Chinese community and doing interviews with them. He actually invited a karaoke band and high school bands that involved Chinese kids to come in and play at the Markham Museum to try to understand what kinds of cultures are growing up. Another artist from Taipei, Angel Chen, did a workshop called Dim Sum City, where people would sit around, drink tea, and design new cities with a menu that looked like a dim sum menu, but it was actually an urban planning menu. So you could order, a Subway, or you could order, not a sandwich, but an actual Subway. Or different ways of living and dwelling. So that performative aspect was very important. We also, I was collaborating with Jenny Foster, who is an urban planner at York University, and Chloe Brushwood Rose in the Faculty of Education. And so for us, urban planning was a hugely important component, but also pedagogy. That was absolutely central, is really working with people that were coming to this exhibition and encountering contemporary art for the first time. I mean, we were assuming that most of the people that were going to come to the exhibition wouldn't necessarily know that much about contemporary art. So having Dawsons and training Dawsons to interact with the public was very important, and we ran a graduate course at York University in order to really help the docents develop their way of engaging with the public. So all of those things were important pieces. I conceive of this project, as with the other projects I've been talking about, as process-oriented. So they are based on networks of associations and interpretations, so different interpretations of history, different interpretations of the future, engaging with our archive at the Markham Museum, but also just being very much site specific, and that means that it's always in movement, it's process oriented, it's site specific, it's also temporally grounded. So it's not a static thing, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. It's not something that exists in an art gallery and it's stuff on a wall. It's an animal that's alive and very dynamic. People had very different experiences of the exhibition, and it had many, many different layers, and many people came back several times because it had these layers and levels. So how did this happen? I was very lucky to receive a grant from the Trudeau Foundation that really, really allowed us to make this experiment. And the Trudeau Foundation is open to crazy ideas, what they say, thinking outside the box. I also, with my colleagues at York, received a Social Science and Humanities Research Council grant, so that allowed us to use this public art exhibition, the collaboration with the museum, as a new form of knowledge mobilization and as an experiment. And I see this as experimental. So the Future Cinema Lab, there was lots of technology that we were experimenting with. Some work, some I wasn't that happy with. We got grants from the Ontario and Canada Council for the Arts. The Greenbelt Foundation was an important collaborator. Tourism Ontario, and you can read all of our collaborators. I would say the most important collaboration was with the museum. It was an incredible honor to have worked with Kathy. I learned a tremendous amount because I had never collaborated with a museum, and to me, this is the museum of the future also. It's what museums are going to be able to do. There is, as you all know, a movement to involve artists. A number of curators are experimenting with inviting artists in to reinterpret the archive. So this is, to me, very, very exciting. So thank you very much for allowing me to present this work. Thank you.